To be completely transparent, I always put that in there to remind myself to start the recording. And so, of course, we would love to see your faces. It helps us as speakers to react to see what's getting, you all activated. And we know that many of you work from home. And so we invite your kids, creatures, pod, and housemates to join us in the Zoom. I have a dog. Sometimes he makes an appearance and we get it. And then I encourage all of you to have something to take notes and process your thoughts. As always, I like to offer these invitations to all of our program participants. Today, I invite you to listen deeply when we're in this space, stay engaged, embrace and notice discomfort and tension, explore and ask yourself why those feelings might be coming up, and don't forget to take care of yourself. Don't be afraid to take risks, ask questions, and be vulnerable. Systems of injustice weren't built in a day, and they're not going to be dismantled in one. And we invite you all to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We're all trying to better our giving and center it in equity and justice. And then finally, I invite you all to hold each other with compassion. This is a learning space, and I personally am of the belief that social justice work is a practice. It's something that we're all working on daily. We were born in an oppressive system, so we all have to unlearn things, and mistakes are going to be made. So when folks invite you in, accept the invitation and sit with how you can grow. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. And I'm just going to share a little bit more about the two folks that I invited today. I'm going to let them both do their introductions and give their, spiel on the work that they're doing. But part of the reason why I invited these two amazing folks is that both of their organizations, and I'm not going to spoil anything because I want them to share their amazing work. Both of their organizations are organizations that truly deeply inspire me. And they're organizations that when I'm thinking of who I want Giving Circles to be funding, who I want philanthropy and donors to be funding and be excited about, these two organizations are the ones that really come like in my top lists. So with that, I am very excited to welcome these two speakers today. And with that, let me just pin our team. Give me 1 second to find Alyssa. There you are. And one thing that I just want to note for everybody today is that Alyssa is not feeling well. And so with that, Alyssa is going to be off camera today and might hop from the meeting a little bit early. So thank you all for your patience with that. And let's get started. Which one of you would like to introduce yourselves first? Do we have a volunteer? I will call on someone if I have to.
I'll go.
Okay, awesome. Welcome, Alyssa. Please share a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. My name's Alyssa Wainaina. I work in Idaho. And I started the Black Liberation Collective during the lockdown and pandemic in 2020. I'm excited to be here, and my pronouns are they, them, if I didn't say that.
Hi, I'm Amrita, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Brooklyn, and I lead an organization, and I'm one of 6 co-founders of an organization called South Asian SOAR. We're national, and we're a network of 40 other nonprofits that all operate locally, and I can share more about what we do, but generally, we focus on the issue of gender-based violence in South Asian communities in the US. Thanks
Awesome.
for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm really excited for this. And folks, I want to encourage all of you to think about questions that you might want to ask Amrita and Alyssa as we get into this discussion. And so since we started with you, Alyssa, I would love if you would be willing to pop back on the mic and share more about the story of your organization and, the work that you all are doing.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, we started during the pandemic and the lockdown. I decided to start the organization because I saw a community of really powerful Black organizers in Idaho that weren't able to get funding and support for their work within the Black community. So I went ahead and created an organization where we could get the resources and community building that we needed to be able to organize even stronger for the Black community. Since then, we've shifted focus to Black trans folks in Idaho specifically. My team is entirely made up of Black trans folks, and we completely serve Black, queer, and trans people exclusively. Although we do have other resources for other members of our Black community in Idaho. Um, we started off our organization as a mutual aid-based organization, especially during the pandemic. I mean, it's still a pandemic, but during the lockdown, folks really needed support, especially when it came to healthcare and accommodations for work. And from there, we grew into an organization that has a guaranteed income program. We support about 10 Black trans folks for an entire year at a time, and give them financial support so that they can thrive and have sustainability and stability. We also have, so that's our Black Power program. We also have our Journey program, which is a gender affirming care program. We're able to get folks the support that they need holistically to be able to have the gender affirming care that they need, which is very difficult to access in Idaho right now. We also have a program centered around getting Black trans youth pro bono therapy support. We pay for their sessions for them. We're working on a program that we are gathering gender affirming and trans specific clothing and trying to get high quality clothing that's culturally relevant and distributed starting next year. And then we also have a leadership development program that we use environmentalism to go ahead and get more Black, queer, and trans leaders from our community out into the world. So those are kind of our programs. We also have a community crisis fund, like I said, which we can offer rapid response support. But ultimately, we're a team of 5 Black trans folks, and we're all based in Idaho. Um, it's a really difficult place to be right now, and we continue diligently serving our community. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Amrita, how about you? Tell us more about SOAR.
Yeah, that's incredible, Alyssa. I could listen to you, and I'm just in awe of all that you are doing. Um, so South Asian SOAR also started during the lockdown, but we have a bit of an interesting legacy that we build off of. So across the US, there's um, basically about 40 different nonprofits that exist to provide services to South Asian communities that are experiencing gender-based violence. So that's including domestic violence, physical abuse, which we kind of like know more typically, emotional abuse, financial abuse, things like in-law abuse and elder abuse, even child sexual abuse. So kind of the umbrella for all forms of intimate partner violence and domestic violence that we might see. These organizations are as old as actually 1984. So the first organization that was ever founded to address this specifically in South Asian communities was founded 40 years ago. Those organizations are generally deeply under-resourced, very small, like high turnover organizations that like I was just thinking today, like especially in a moment like now, though there are organizations that exist to provide services to survivors, they are community hubs. And so that means when any sort of crisis is happening, that's where folks are going for their information about immigration. That's where they're going for their COVID vaccine. That's where they're going for their economic stimulus check information, like that's where they're going for everything because that's where their community is. And so though those organizations were started to provide services in the more nonprofit model, I think they're really kind of broader than that. And when the pandemic started, that was another moment for those orgs to sort of come together and realize that they've actually been really limited in the nonprofit model to only provide services. And if you're only providing services, you're really limited in your ability to do some of the upstream prevention, advocacy, culture change work that these organizations that's like part of addressing violence and ending gender-based violence. But we've been so focused in on post-violence services, healing, legal assistance, financial assistance, et cetera. And I think though those services are so important, it's hard to feel like you're breaking the cycle of violence and really make dents there. And so SOAR was really founded to actually just be a home for those organizations to come together and to be able to work on some of those resources for prevention, funding for prevention, systems level advocacy around the many intersections that South Asian survivors face. And in the early stages of those conversations, what we also identified was basically, if we want to build this national movement, it's also important that we center not only organizations, because I mean, I grew up in a South Asian community, I identify as a survivor, and the thing that I think I take away from that experience is like, you have to go a really long way before you reach out to an organization or you reach out to an entity or institution for help. You're usually going to your parent, friend, dance class, like, you know, all of those spaces that you are in first before you might go to an organization that quote unquote provides services. And so it really is this collective movement that requires our community to step up, and it requires us to center survivors. So SOAR actually stands for Survivors, Organizations, and Allies Rising. And it's really about invoking that entire set of folks who should be at the table to work on this issue. So I'll just end with like kind of the what we do. And it's really based on the three groups I just said. So we build capacity to strengthen organizations on the ground. That looks like everything from mentorship programs between small and large organizations, rapid response, convening statements, resources. We have like consent educational resources. We have an abortion care guide we've published in 20 South Asian languages that all of those organizations can use, et cetera. We have a leadership building program for survivors and allies that looks like building their storytelling and community organizing skills to actually be leaders and allies in the movement to end violence. And then lastly, we publish everything we're learning into national reports and briefings that SOAR can advocate with, and our organizations can advocate with everywhere from the local, state, and federal level. So that's kind of like the lay of like the land in terms of what we do and kind of the why we do it too.
I love it. And I'm going to stick with you with this next question.
Okay.
And I would say that both of you started to answer this a little bit, but for those of our audience today or viewers tomorrow that, you know, maybe they haven't worked at a like small nonprofit before, or maybe they're not as familiar with the nonprofit space, or even, you know, you mentioned that like sometimes the 501c3 status like keeps folks from doing the work they actually want to do. Can you both share more about what does a day in the life look like, or a week in the life look like for you, or look like for some of your colleagues in these spaces?
Yes. Okay. And me first, right?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll ping pong back and forth with the last person who spoke can start up the conversation.
Yeah. No worries. I mean, as like Kelsey, I feel like for you also just as a small nonprofit, like our days look similar. I feel like in the first couple of years of starting SOAR, we actually got seed funding to get started, and that was really crucial. It allowed me to go straight into programming, and not be spending the first 2 years of SOAR fundraising. And that's why I think today, like we have a network of 40 organizations, or now we're at like 43. We have a network of 100 plus survivors and allies. Like we were able to dive straight into programming. And I know that's not the question you asked around funding, but I think it kind of relates because we were also able to experiment. All of the funding that we got at the beginning was unrestricted. unrestricted funding, which means we could use it on whatever programs we wanted. And I think as a small organization, the ability to be lean in that way and pivot and be really responsive was really important because, for example, within a year of SOAR starting, Roe fell. And that meant we had to really respond to our community's needs around reproductive justice, around basic health information, around organizations in all different states facing different sorts of implications. So that's an example for me of like, well, one, a little bit of like how our team works. And because we're a membership-based organization, our charge has always been to be like very close to the ground in terms of what our members need, and then respond to that and make sure that what we're creating is responsive across the entire nation. So I would say that's generally how we like work and how our funding has impacted that day to day. And now that we just marked 3 years, I think things have shifted for myself. Yes. More towards fundraising and knowing like the funding we got in the beginning is not sustaining to now because some of the organizations that funded us really generously are spend downs, which means they won't be continuing their funding. And so I think, well, that's just on a personal note, like as the ED, my role has shifted a lot more towards fundraising and collective giving, thinking about sustainable models, so that we don't, like, it's so nice to get a big influx of funding, but when you get $500,000, which allows you to bring on 2 teammates, but that's not renewed past 2 years, there's real like ebbs and flows and spikes in terms of the organization's ability to do its work. And so that's something I've been thinking about a lot. But yeah, I mean, I hope that answered your question. I kind of did a little bit of both, but I know if I should share more.
Yeah. One thing that I would love for you to share more is like, since you pulled out that like you as an individual went from like more programmatic work to having to focus on the fundraising work, like I'm wondering how that is for you, because I know for me, I've worked at organizations where my priorities have had to shift because of fundraising, and I want to humanize that a little bit because I think so many folks hear that and they're like, yeah, jobs shift and change. But it's like when you're doing work like this, having that shifting in roles can be sometimes great, but sometimes challenging. So, how has that shift been for you as a founder and activist and all that?
Yeah, and I think you spoke to two things. One is like the role shifting, two is like funding itself shifting. And I'm like, I think that feels like a little bit of a game because again, like with the fall of Roe, we got this huge influx of funding to fill gaps in resources for reproductive justice. Within a year, like that wasn't there anymore. And so we hired a reproductive justice fellow. We began like, understanding our community's needs, and then we weren't able to sustain that work. And I think like that's the kind of thing that is interesting and can be challenging. I'm noticing that with the elections as well. And just like generally in the gender space with the Me Too movement, like there was this, again, huge influx in funding. And then now there's like trends around supporting work internationally, which I think is really important, but so hard as a young national organization in the US when we're barely just establishing trust and collective efforts nationally to then be like, oh, wait, all the gender funders are like, y'all should build networks internationally. And I'm like, wait, I think that's been a little like interesting too, is just like, what does our dialogue with funders look like so that we're not like following the priorities, but we're also included in setting some of those priorities. And I'm sure like, we're one of so many organizations. And so I don't think that I'm like, I mean, I do think funders should be called into that, but I also don't think it's a easy feat by any means to listen and hear and respond to what like all sorts of organizations needs. And that's where I do think collective giving is really, really important. And it's been one of the joys, I would say, in the past year of shifting to fundraising is South Asian SOAR is a mission I think that so many people can get behind because they've experienced violence in their life. And I think the opportunity there for us is to actually make the giving be the organizing too. And so something that's been cool is like I can bring together like a circle of ambassadors and donors, and we're also talking about how their child got bullied that day and how they had a narcissistic boss in their workplace. And we can fold in conversations about violence into, and that's why it matters for our community. And so to see those connections be made is really cool. So it's and then lastly, I think switching to fundraising, yeah, is a mixed bag. I mean, it's like high highs and low lows, I think, because sometimes it can make you feel like your work is really important, and then sometimes not important enough for anyone to invest in. And that can be hard. And that's where programming, I think, is like almost a constant source of you're in the community, you're doing the work that needs to be done, but both are important.
Yeah. I know I've seen time and time again with particularly founders. They start in programming and then have to shift to fundraising, and they're like, wait, where's that fire that was keeping me alive and why I was here? Not saying that that's what's going on with you, but it can be tough in that way. Alyssa, how about you? What does a day/week in the life of you and your team look like these days?
Absolutely. First of all, what's been shared so far is really resonating with me. I also had a similar path of going from doing programming work to more mentorship kind of a role, and then now it's more of the logistical and financial side, is what most of my time is spent on. Um, I would say that it really depends on the time of year. I think that our organization goes through a really interesting cycle, because we kind of start most of our programming, like I said, the direct service programming, like the guaranteed income, the gender affirming care, and programs like that begin in the spring. So we're getting everyone's details together. We're making sure everything aligns, and we're starting to book appointments and consultations and things like that starting in the spring. A lot of our time is spent working directly with the folks that we serve then. Um, Summer is usually when our programming has like begun and we're kind of just in the brunt of it, especially the leadership development program. It's over the summer. Fall time is, of course, not of course, but is of course, fall fundraising is a huge deal. I feel like a lot of grants and different things like that as you're preparing for the next year come up. So a lot of our time in the fall is spent fundraising and applying for grants. And then in the winter, we kind of try to pause and put out some reports over what we've done over the year and kind of vision a little bit for the future, especially as we understand what our funding will be for the next year. So yeah, I kind of agree. I think my days really shift and change. It's hard to say a day in the life, just because also all of my program directors have different programs and their roles are very different as well. But I would say I completely agree. I think when I started out, I had two really small grants or something like that. It was really, really small to start. And it felt like so much money because it was just me and other community organizers, you know. So we were able to do so much with that. And then as we grew and I was able to hire more amazing organizers and mentor them and connect with more folks in our community and also partnerships like that. Um, our capacity has grown so much, and we're able to do things that I couldn't have imagined when I started the organization. And it's just each year with exponential growth, fundraising becomes more and more of a focus. I would say it is hard. Kelsey, I had a moment last year where I just felt like so much of my time was spent fundraising, especially because my staff are program directors and I'm like the executive director. So it felt like something that I had to do for my staff. I got to a point where I was feeling really burnt out and I wasn't able to interact as much with the folks we were serving through our programming. And I started to kind of lose sight. I think making it a team effort, fundraising a team effort this year has been really helpful. And just growing the team as well and growing my own support as an organizer has been really helpful. So, yes, I would say, unfortunately, because we are mostly funded by grants and foundations, a lot of our a lot of my personal time, especially this time of year, and I'd say the entire team is spent on grant applications and other opportunities like that. And right now, we're really trying to grow our other, like we're trying to diversify our income portfolio a little bit more. And so I'm excited to kind of learn more about that as well. And hopefully, not hopefully, definitely be able to continue to grow the way we have been.
I love that. Um, and what I'm hearing in both of your answers, right? And this is, I think, what I love about working in small but powerful spaces like this, is that y'all and your teams are wearing these multiple hats, right? And you are constantly asked to be nimble and flexible, and you're meeting the needs of the community while being nimble and flexible. And so within that, one of the things, and I would say both of you started to answer this a little bit, but I'm sitting with the question of if your donors or your funders, if you could tell them anything, if there was something that you wish they knew so they could start, improving or shifting, what are some of the core things that you would want them to know? And, obviously we've been doing this series for a while, and we've heard a lot of different ideas. But yeah, what are the core things that you wish more folks would know? And this can range from like the everyday donor to larger funders, institutional funders. It can be about, anything that is like most pressing on your mind. Alyssa, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that wow, I completely lost my train of thought. I had so much as you were speaking. I think that importantly, most importantly, focusing on funding organizations that are like mine and SOAR, grassroots, and that are led by the same community that they serve, and really deeply storied to our communities. And even though a lot of our work is direct service, um, and a lot of our work it may not have the measurable impact as some larger organizations and nonprofits that are more well established. I think that the work that we do on the ground is really important, and for a lot of folks is what sustains their life and thriving, to the point where nonprofit, larger organizations can go ahead and do some of the larger movement work they're doing. I think being on the ground and being within the communities that we're serving is really important. And it's a special skill that not every organization can do, especially as small as we are. We're able to be nimble, just like you said, and we're able to be adaptable. And we're usually the first to hear about needs that are coming up for our community as well. So just, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to invest in grassroots organizations that are, especially on the smaller scale, a little bit goes a long way for us as well, just because we are smaller and we're have to be much more intentional with our spending and programming. Other than that, I would say there's also, other than, of course, right now I'm trying to diversify my organizational funding. I would say that, which is what I say to a lot of every time I get a chance to talk to funders and foundations, is having financial support that isn't necessarily incredibly structured or has a lot of reporting requirements and things like that is always helpful as well, just because a lot of our work is surprisingly rapidly responding and changing to the times, especially in places like Idaho, where our legislative sessions at the beginning of each year are more and more atrocious, and impact our community in real time. And so the funders that I have the best relationships with and lean on the most are ones that it's not that they don't care how we spend the money at all. We definitely have active conversations about it throughout the year, but it's able to be conversations rather than more of like them explaining rules to us and then us trying to follow them and fit ourselves into those boxes. So that's always very helpful. And lastly, I'll just say that there's other ways that especially smaller organizations could use support. I know that not everybody who wants to donate and support an organization has like a specific nonprofit kind of field skill that they like to share. They're not everybody is necessarily like, oh, I can help you fundraise. Oh, I can help you with your programming. I can volunteer to help you write policy and things like that. But there are other ways that have been really creative that folks have been able to show up for us, especially folks who have little side hobbies or small businesses where they can donate like their, I don't know, handmade lotions to us, and we can share those out with our group so they can feel a little like they've been treated sweetly, and that can have a big impact on folks as well. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts. I am curious to hear more as well.
I love that. And you already started to answer what my second question was in relation to how like funders can potentially support you beyond the dollar. And I love that example of lotion. It's something I just to share with the group. It's something that I think a lot about in relation to even my own hobbies. I study herbalism on the side, so I've been trying to find different ways to get those care kits out, right? Because we know now more than ever, there are so many communities that do need to be loved on. And that doesn't always look like money. Sometimes it does look like sending those sweet, sweet things. Alyssa, I saw you unmuted again, so I want you to.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. I was going to say one of our most consistent supporters has actually been a small greenhouse in Idaho. And every time we have an event, they donate like plants, flowers. They have just like, it's always the sweetest little gifts that we get to send our attendees home with. Just little gifts of like, again, plants, flower bouquets that we make for them. And those are all donations that they provide for us so consistently. So that's like one of the sweetest supports that we have that has a big impact, like bigger than you would think.
Lovely. All right. Go ahead, Amrita.
I feel like Alyssa really covered so much, and you also gave me just so much to think about. So thank you for sharing all of those things. I feel like just a couple other things I would add on, like something I hear and I maybe also think isn't talked about enough is like equity and pay for staff working at nonprofits. And I see this specifically also as a national org that has done like salary data collection from all of our organizations. And there's entire orgs operating with completely volunteer staff. And I think that's totally okay if that's like the choice of the people that are there. But a lot of these organizations also started as volunteer organizations and then now have turned into professional services organizations that employ people for a living, but still have the same mentality of like, this is volunteer work. And so it devalues each person on that staff. And like, I think, especially for people that are on the front lines of providing like services and counseling and care to other survivors, many of whom are survivors themselves, like the turnover in this field is so high. And I think that means that our organizations don't sustain and the work doesn't sustain. And if we're in in the field to build a movement, it's impossible. And that's just like I'm talking about the frontline advocates, but then there's the organizers who are not resourced at all. And so one of the things we do is we try to we just did a storytelling anthology of 20 South Asian survivor stories, and we compensated each storyteller up to $1,000. So that they could get childcare while they work on their story. They could get therapy for whatever was coming up for them, and just a lot of people also ask me like, do your members pay you? And we're like, no, we actually try to stipend them as much as possible. And I think there can be more reciprocity there over time, but something that we just like recognize and is central to like our work is how under-resourced everyone working in this movement already is. And so sometimes I'll hear questions around like, well, is that money going to staff? And the myth of like the nonprofit overhead. And I'm like, but that's what's running the national summit with 300 people, like it's that staff person. It's the program directors, Alyssa, that you were talking about that are like doing that work. And so paying them and making sure their benefits are taken care of are part of the work. And it's so important. So just, valuing that and also making it be a transparent conversation and not something to feel like any type of embarrassment or like weirdness around is something I'd love to like see more of.
Mm.
And then the second thing I'm realizing like is now that we're at this stage where we've done a lot of nimble like experimenting, we're like ready to build some more long-term programming and just realizing like, you know, I'll hear funders say like, well, what's the scale that you'll be like achieving in the next 2 years? And I'm like, well, it's going to take me 2 years to get to like phase 1 outcomes and then we could scale. But like, I don't want to scale what we also haven't like tested well enough or collected feedback on or any of these things. And so just like understanding the stage that we're at as small organizations and what the trajectory might look like, and really having the funding sort of meet that need, having the questions and conversations also meet that level and that need. So that's something I'm thinking about. And then thirdly, zooming out, and like I think the statistics that's often thrown around for philanthropy for women and girls is that it's like 2% of philanthropic funding goes to women and girls. And so if like funders, and this is on me as as a leader to share more too, is like understanding like there, like every cause is so important and every issue is so important, but also like how, when you're deciding your priorities, can you build a portfolio around this work? And like, just, I think understanding the gaps, move like field wide, philanthropy wide, I think would be helpful for funders. And then I can just answer your second question since we kind of
Yeah,
started.
go for it. Go for it.
One thing I've been realizing, and Alyssa, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but especially as a small org as well. And I think about this as a young leader who doesn't have a network in the nonprofit space, is how far like credibility, network, and connections
Mm.
go. And I think there are funders who have done a lot to democratize and open up, yeah, the way like you can put in an application, but there's so many that are completely inaccessible unless you've been recommended or invited. And sometimes there's just like no pathway to get there than like knowing someone who knows someone. And I think I like, there's part of me that's like, I love how reliant on relationship building and trust that is. And there's part of me that's like, that is so inaccessible for most organizations. Um, and I think like, yeah, again, as a young leader, I do feel that even with age, where I'm like, I don't actually know a lot of the directors in those organizations because we're in, you know, whatever. And so just thinking about like, I think that's one thing to sort of question, but I do think funders can do a lot to support their grantees to meet their next funders, especially if you're a spend down. It's like, what funder roundtable could I organize? What 5 new funders could you meet? Who could I help you share this work with? Because I think, and someone said this at a fundraising dinner the other day, like I was standing next to someone basically on our board, or our growth council, and she said the vision coming from the growth council member makes her feel a sense of credibility. And I love that, and I recognize how important it is for someone to hear from someone that they know and trust. And so I think like a funder, whether that's an individual donor or a foundation funder, their word can go a long way. Um, and the last thing is, I also believe a lot that like we're not operating independently as organizations. So funders being able to connect us to other orgs that are doing similar work so that we can learn from them too. Like I love that kind of stuff. I think learning from each other is so helpful. It's so important. I'm thinking about us right now going, never having existed in a previous administration like this. Like I want to learn from the orgs that have, and I want to know like what should we be thinking about and doing. And that's like the wisdom that can be shared in that funders can convene, because they also have the capacity to like resource people to convene. And
Totally.
so I think that that's like part of their responsibility rather than like me as a grassroots org trying to get a bunch of other orgs in the room. So those are sprinkling of my thoughts.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, Amrita, I couldn't agree more with so much of what you said. I feel like thinking about sustainability is so important, especially for our organizers and the folks that we are able to incorporate into the movement work that we're doing. I think, especially moving as a grassroots organizations and as smaller organizations, we have to move with so much intention and care. We don't have the resources to kind of trample over something and have to backtrack, you know? So I agree with the moving slowly, not slowly necessarily, but moving at an intentional pace. Um, Also with the equitable pay and things that you were talking about in relation to that, I was also thinking another thing that has helped me a lot in conversations with donors and folks who are just a little bit more experienced in working with other small organizations like mine,
Mm.
and communicating our worth to me, like helping me understand the importance of the work that I'm doing, the impact that it's having, feeling like I'm getting like our work is getting its flowers is always so impactful for us. Um, because we do get appreciation from the folks we serve, of course, but for some reason, just being recognized by someone who has more experience in the field just feels so impactful. And no, like kind of getting coached on the confidence of my work and our worth as an organization has really helped me um, just move with more confidence in my work. And it's so important. And other ways that I feel that funders and donors could also support us is like Amrita was kind of speaking on, is consistency. I think those spend down funds are also very, you know, they're some of the most uh, core funding sources for our work, and yet it is really difficult when the funding just ends and we don't necessarily have connections. I really liked your idea of funders kind of reaching out, individual folks on the board or individual donors kind of reaching out to 5 other folks around them that they personally know and sharing about our work. That would be so incredibly helpful, just because there are rooms we don't even know about that we're not in, exactly like you were saying. And another thing, as my org did start during the the last presidency. So coming up, something that I've been thinking about a lot, because it was a huge issue for us, is digital security. I think that folks
Mm.
feel empowered by whoever's in office and therefore feel more empowered to kind of attack, and we have to be a little bit more on the defense. So keeping you'll see if you look into my website, there's almost no information about the real work that we do on there. There's kind of like a couple of pieces of information and then a donation page, and that's more so because the work that we do in Idaho is incredibly radical for the space. You know, it's mutual aid, it's gender affirming care, it's things that we can think of as core essential rights that folks have. But those, it's not seen that way where I'm from. So we have to be very careful about being more covert in our work and mostly sharing the work that we do with folks who we know are on our side, if that makes sense, and making sure our information doesn't get out. We've had staff of ours be doxxed before, for simply doing the work that we do. I think one year, the biggest instance we had was someone did a presentation on critical race theory and just what it is and the fact that it's a legal concept and not necessarily anything more than that. They got doxxed for weeks from that and was not safe in their home and things like that. So we really focus on security and safety. And digital security is one of the things that I am trying to gear up before January 20th, so that we can kind of be more prepared than we were last time. It was a huge issue last time, so definitely
Thank
keep.
you. Thank you for sharing that, Alyssa. I was actually gonna ask you all what you're thinking about going into this next presidency. So you totally anticipated what I was gonna ask. For those in our audience that aren't familiar with the term doxing, can you share a little bit more about what doxing is and what it looked like for your staff member?
Yes, absolutely. So My understanding of doxing is that your personal information basically gets put online so that folks who don't believe in the work that you're doing or believe in what you're saying or believe in how you're moving are able to call your place of work and try to get you fired. They can show up to your address. They can call you, call family members. They can figure out what your license plate number is, track you around. There's different pieces of information that are just on the internet just because that's the age that we're in today. That's quite unavoidable. But once you get in the sights of the alt-right movement or or folks similar to that, it can be really dangerous, especially being a public figure like our organizers are. So um, to prepare for the presidency, we are, firstly, like I said, we're shifting more towards individual donors. We don't get any funding from the government, but if we did, we would probably look towards other sources for that as well. Digital security, and then we are going to so that means I'm looking more into the information that we have on like the folks that we serve and how can we keep that information protected in case someone tries to hack us. That way folks aren't immediately exposed. That would be really dangerous. Um, and then we also are in solidarity and always constantly being updated by our local ACLU Idaho because they are in legal battles with some of the anti-trans legislation that passed this year during the session. So we're consistently working on that. And I would say keeping up with the same programming we're doing, it's going to be more important than ever. And at the same time, keeping it more low key than ever as well. I don't think we were prepared for it last in 2016 to 2019 and 2020, but this year we can be a little bit more prepared. So we're just going to try to keep it really locked down and low key. Also, I think it benefits us to be from a place like Idaho because this is how our work looks consistently. It's always incredibly right-wing folks in leadership and passing legislation and attacking our organizers. So we have a lot of experience in this type of work and are absolutely always willing to share that information more if y'all know of any other orgs that could use it, or Amrita, yours as well.
Yeah. Alyssa, selfishly, I might have a question for you as someone who's volunteering with a trans group right now. But I also really appreciated you noting the piece about your website being very high level in your work. That's something that we offer and share with many of the folks that we train, that when you're looking for organizations, you know, a website that maybe isn't as like robust in information or even at times like aesthetically pleasing, although I do love y'all's website. It doesn't mean that the organization isn't doing good work, right? Like, don't judge a book off of its cover. We always say that, and really like finding those spaces where you can do that deep dive. For context for audience members, I had learned about Alyssa's organization through like a Google search, and then I was like, whoa, I need to know more. I need to figure it out. And so I had reached out to learn a little bit more, and that's how I learned. Amrita, like, what are you thinking, Amrita, what are you thinking about in relation to the incoming um, next 4+ years? You know, how are y'all preparing? What fears do you all have? Knowing that, you know, for each presidency, there's different things to prepare for, but what's on y'all's mind?
Yeah, I just came out of our national like member meeting right before this, where we had leaders from the West Coast, East Coast, and South, a national perspective, providing sort of their insight on what
Yeah.
to expect. And so I think that's the stage that we're in right now, is really understanding like it was just we did like a check-in question and everyone was like, I'm drained, I'm exhausted, I'm anxious, I'm tired. And so it kind of got me thinking too, like there's both the logistical resource community needs to meet, and then there's like the people needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as an org like SOAR that serves to capacity build for frontline organizations, like maybe part of our role is literally providing therapy funds for, or frontline workers. Like, I don't know yet, but I think we're in that phase of really assessing like what is going to be the most impactful. And so, I mean, I don't know yet, but I do know, considering the population of immigrant survivors, I think that intersection of immigration and gender-based violence is going to be particularly dangerous, and a lot will come in the next 4 years and years after that. And I think that leads me to maybe like my third thought, which is, as an organization that's also seeking to do community organizing, I think we're thinking a lot about like the cultural shift that's taking place, in terms of values, sense of belonging, safe spaces for men, rising Hindutva and Hindu nationalism. Like, what are all of the trends that are like, shifts around gender-based violence that we actually have to like create narratives around, create spaces around, that aren't the services work, but that's like the organizing culture change work that's going to like help us think about the next 10 years. And I'm thinking a lot about like also where I see a lot of opportunity there for people who do healing work to like step up and fill those resource gaps and those conversational spaces and healing spaces. So kind of thinking both short term, long term, thinking a lot about all the partners we have, how to best like use our time, our own energy. So, and it wasn't a clear answer, but I think it's just, there's a lot of different things to like think about right now. And I want to be thoughtful, and I want to like just spend some more time digesting before we kind of figure out where we're going and how we're going to be the most useful and
Absolutely.
supportive.
Absolutely. Thank you. It makes sense to me. I'm like, yes, of course, that's not a clear answer because it's unclear times, right? We're all sitting in whatever is possible. So keeping an eye on time, I do want to make sure I'm being respectful of everybody's time. Before I let everybody go, is there one audience question or anything like that? I didn't see anything come in the chat. I'm going to remove everybody's pin so we can see our audience for a second. Bear with me. It's always weird removing your own pin. All right. Any other questions? If not, I think the last question that I have is, how are y'all maintaining hope?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure. Sure.
I think that I maintain hope by truly looking at the impact I'm having on individual folks in our work. I think this year we started our leadership development program, and I was able to be there for the first day of the program and kind of support my program director on it. And everyone was just so excited to be in a Black queer space that wasn't about being Black and queer. It was just about like loving the outdoors and leadership and connection and eating good food and exploring our emotions and things like that. And so that is something that I hold on to in moments like this, especially working in Idaho. There's not necessarily a huge Black, queer, and trans community. It's more about what's the depth that we can reach with the folks that we do have in our network. And so that really brings me hope. And the team that I work with is incredible as well. And I get so much life from seeing them pull off organizing feats and the programs that they do that they also couldn't have imagined themselves doing.
That's so beautiful. I know we're at time, so we really feel more of the same. Just on a personal note, I think like people are also, this is a good reminder to like hold your loved ones closer and like spend time with them and allow yourself that joy. And I feel like that's kind of something I'm like sticking to as well. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.